There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Some people see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?"
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And now your host, Stephen Hanks.
You know, folks, when the Patriotic Progressive airs next Saturday morning, which will be November 9th, I think you're going to hear one more short clip of a speech after the one that you heard from Barack Obama on the opening of the show. And that's going to be probably a little acceptance clip from the person who's going to be the next president of the United States after probably Wednesday morning, Kamala Harris. Good morning to all of you out there in Sedona and throughout the Verde Valley, listening right now on this November 2nd, 2024. I can't believe it's November. God, help me. Boy, you know, when you get old, time just races by, and it's got to stop. Anyway, you hear this show through KAZM, Mellow Mountain Radio, 106.5 FM and 780 AM. Like the announcer said, my name is Stephen Hanks, and this radio show, which is heard every Saturday morning at 8 a.m., is called The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And I also want to welcome folks from all over Arizona and around the country who may be tuning into the live stream on mellowmountainradio.com. And I hope some of my friends in New York are listening right now. And anyone who is listening to the podcast version on Apple or Amazon Podcast, my YouTube channel, Spotify, and now you can also listen to the podcast on my Substack newsletter at Patriotic Progressive. So, folks, unless we have a special guest pop in at some point during this hour, it's going to be all me. And today, talking about the upcoming election day and everything that's going on in the political scene right now, or as much as I can get in an hour. And so I might go off on some tangents, as I am wont to do. But I'll start out by saying that at the end of last Saturday morning show, I said that for this week's show, today's show, I would probably be a nervous wreck talking about the election on November 5th. And that I would probably be overdosing on blood pressure medications, which frankly I've pretty much done since Donald Trump came down that escalator in his building that is a tribute to a man with penile insecurities to announce his candidacy for president in 2015. But do you know what? And I'm going to be really honest with you right now. I'm actually not as nervous about this presidential election as I thought I'd be, because come this Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning, it could be sometime Wednesday early afternoon, as I said earlier, Kamala Harris will be elected as the next president of the United States with, I am predicting, somewhere between 292 and 319 electoral votes. And you're probably saying, boy, Stephen, you're really optimistic. Everybody says it's a close race. It's going to go down to the wire. It's neck and neck. It's tied. The margin of error, this or that. Listen, this is not going to be as close as all the media pundits would have you believe. They're supposed to say that so they can keep you watching and they can keep the campaigns sending in money for ads. But this election is not going to be. Kamala Harris may even, and I think she will, get more electoral votes than Joe Biden did in 2020. And one of the reasons I know that is because, and call me crazy, call me naive, call me irresponsible, but I still have faith in this, in the majority of the people in this country to do the right thing, the smart thing, and yes, the patriotic thing. But another reason I know that is because over the past week, Donald Trump, his handlers, his supporters, and the right-wing extreme media have committed the most politically self-destructive acts and political malpractice probably in American political history. When in the final days of a presidential campaign, your closing argument is a Nazi-style rally in my beloved New York, where you call Puerto Rico garbage, where your sycophantic Republican Speaker of the House tells Trump supporters that Trump will destroy the Affordable Care Act and repeal the CHIPS Act that has created tens of thousands of jobs, including in Arizona. And when the presidential candidate himself implies that a former Republican Congresswoman and now Kamala Harris supporter, like Liz Cheney, should be made to face a firing squad, you've basically destroyed any chance you had of winning an election. After Trump made those disgusting comments about Liz Cheney, in Glendale, Arizona, by the way, Kamala Harris responded yesterday saying that Donald Trump's statements were disqualifying for the office of president. The only disagreement I have with the vice president's observation is that Trump should have been disqualified by the American people, politicians, and the American media before the 2016 election. And as always happens when I'm preparing for a show on a Saturday morning, and I'm all set to say what I want to say, something happens on a Friday that makes me either change things or include new information. So after all that I just outlined, that Donald Trump did this week and that his supporters did or said this week, yesterday at a rally, Donald Trump used his microphone to simulate 2 different sex acts. Think about that. Somebody who was a president and who wants to be the president again has been doing and saying all these things. Folks, the man is totally insane. And while I don't think he's going to be elected, as I probably said last week, the idea that 65, maybe 70 million Americans are going to vote for this man really makes me very, very sad. And by the way, while I'm a big fan of early voting and voting by mail before Election Day, all of which pretty much ended around the country yesterday, I think there's a few more states that have early voting today, still have it. The events of the past week that I just outlined for you is one of the reasons why voting early can be a negative. And I say that in this way. Nobody who may have grudgingly voted for Donald Trump, no matter what ridiculous reason they might have had for doing so, cannot now take back their vote because of what they heard from Donald Trump in the past week that might have disgusted them. I'm just saying. And speaking of ridiculous reasons for voting for a cretin like Donald Trump, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to any MAGA Republicans listening to this show right now. And listen, I know it's a long shot that any Republicans who support Donald Trump would be listening to a show called The Patriotic Progressive, but I'm going to take a chance that it's possible there might be perhaps a few people listening on their car radio by accident. So if you happen to listen to this, or somebody tells you about the podcast, I have a message for Republicans and MAGA Republicans, especially listening to this show. What in the world is wrong with you people? I really want to know. And I am specifically, because this show is being broadcast out of Sedona, Arizona, I want to know what's wrong with all of you, quote unquote, Republicans who live in this area and support Donald Trump. How is it possible? How is it possible that you can see and hear what this man has been doing and saying, not just in this election campaign, where you know that the reason why he's even running is to stay out of jail? How can you support him? You don't even look, if you don't like liberals, if you don't like Democrats, if you don't like progressives, if you don't like Kamala Harris, fine. Don't vote. But if you support Donald Trump, a traitor, an insurrectionist, an election denier, a convicted felon, an adjudicated rapist, someone who mocked disabled people, someone who trashed the memory of John McCain, someone who has been in bed with Russia from day one, somebody who is talking to Bibi Netanyahu when he does not run foreign policy in this country. I could spend the next hour going through this list of things that Donald Trump has said and done that make him unqualified to even be on the political scene. And you, MAGA Republicans who live here and all around the country, are going to vote or have voted for this person? How do you look yourselves in the mirror? I want to know. Why? Because of immigration? Because you don't want black and brown people crossing the border? Because of abortion rights? Because you have no understanding that a fetus is not viable until it has consciousness? And you don't want women to have control of their own bodies and their own lives? Or maybe it's because you have a lot of money and you identify with Elon Musk or any of the right-wing oligarchs that want to try to run politics in this country. Whatever those reasons are that you have, they aren't good enough reasons to jeopardize democracy in this country by voting for that crazed, awful, maybe one of the most reprehensible people that's ever been on the American political scene in history. And you support him. I've been driving, the last week I drove down the main drag 89A in Sedona, in West Sedona. And I've seen a little gaggle of people a couple of times, Trump supporters with their signs, and some guy with a Donald Trump mask on. You know, thankfully, it was a small gaggle. I mean, I don't think I've seen more than 10 to a dozen people out there on 89A just waving their Trump signs. And I just think to myself that these people just have lost it. Just lost it. I don't know what to even say anymore. But like I said before, if Kamala Harris wins and this election is closer, I should say when she wins, when I see that total vote count for Donald Trump probably hitting the 70 million mark, all I can say is that we, Democrats, progressives, liberals, people that support democracy and freedom, we're going to have a lot of work to do over the next 4 to 8 years to try to settle this situation down in this country. It's just so Republicans, MAGA people out there in Arizona and otherwise, come to your senses. I'm begging you, come to your senses. You know, don't vote for these people. And you know, the flip side of that, to all my Democratic listeners, my progressive listeners, if you haven't voted yet, please get out there on Election Day and vote up and down the ticket for Democrats. And if you see Republicans that are running unopposed for offices like local judgeships, don't vote for them. All right? We can't have anybody on that ticket in office around here. It's just got to end. This has got to end. So I want to spend some time today, a significant amount of time, talking about the local races and the Senate races. And the Senate races all around the country, by the way, because, you know, when Kamala Harris wins, she's going to need a Democratic Senate to get things done, and it's very important. So even though you might not be able to vote for these people if you live in Arizona, you can still send money. So I'm going to talk about all of that when we come back, but we're going to take a break now, and we'll be right back with the Patriotic Progressive. And we are back with the Patriotic Progressive for Truth, Justice, and the Democratic Way. I'm your host, Stephen Hanks. So, as I said before the break, in order for Kamala Harris, our next president, to accomplish what her agenda is, she's going to need a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. And I'll tell you this, I'm not too concerned about the House right now. I'm pretty confident, I wouldn't say totally confident, but I'm very confident the Democrats are going to take back the House. And I'm keeping an eye on this because as a former New Yorker, you know, I'm hoping that a few congressional seats that somehow flip to Republicans in the 2022 cycle flip back to Democrats this year. And I think there's a good chance of that happening. Also, there are a couple of very high-profile congressional races. The one that I'll mention that I am sincerely hoping happens is that Lauren Boebert, in her congressional seat in Colorado, is defeated by the Republican running against her. You know, she's one toxic person that we need out of the House of Representatives. So I want to talk about the Senate because this is the one that's going to be very interesting on election night. Democrats are holding the Senate right now by 51-49. Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote as the president of the Senate, and we need at least 50 votes again or more if the Senate is going to support Kamala Harris's agenda. So, like I said, even if you can't vote for any of these people other than in the race in Arizona, if you live in Arizona, you can still support them with donations because we really need some of these people to win. So I'm going to go down the Senate races that are the most high profile and the closest and the ones that may be flippable for Democrats, so you can be a little bit more in tune with what's going on here. So if I do it by alphabetical order, we start with Arizona. So as many of my listeners know, this is the race between Congressman Ruben Gallego, and Kerry Lake, the totally toxic Trump sycophant who is running for the Senate, but while she's running for the Senate, is still claiming she won the governorship 2 years ago. Election denier, vaccine denier, total basket case. I don't think this is going to be that close a race. I think Ruben Gallego is going to win pretty easily. There's a Green Party candidate on the ballot who I don't think is going to have that much of an effect, but I'm pretty confident Ruben Gallego is going to be the next senator from Arizona. So that will be a seat that we hold since it was a Democrat, Kristen Sinema, who held that seat before. So let's move to Florida, which is interesting on a couple of levels because there's some buzz, especially because of how hated the governor there is right now. Kamala Harris could pull an upset in Florida. I know it's a long shot, but abortion is on the ballot in Florida. There's people very passionate about that. And even if Kamala Harris comes close, I think what that election could do is help push Debbie Mucarsel-Powell over the top against Rick Scott for the Senate in Florida. That would be a huge race to win because, as many of you know, Rick Scott is just another one of those Trump-supporting creeps who, for lack of a better word, who we really need to get it. He's one of these guys that gets on national television and talks about eliminating the Affordable Care Act, et cetera, et cetera. And, oh, my goodness, a special guest has just walked into the studio. A surprise special guest happens to be, he just comes in. This guy is such a radio guy that, without missing a beat, he just goes to the chair, puts on the headphones, and it happens to be the owner of KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio, Chuck Helstein. Hi,
Morning,
Chuck.
guys.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right. So I'm going to do a couple of more of these Senate races and then bring you in because I know you want to talk about like a special thing the station.
Absolutely. We got some good things planned for you guys.
All right. So I'll do a couple more, then I'll bring you in, and then we'll go back to the Senate.
You were doing great, man. I loved it.
Thank you. So we talked about Arizona and Florida. Maryland, and I think this is going to be a Democratic hold race for the Senate, but we still need to focus on it. Angela Alsobrooks, very close friend of Kamala Harris, is running for that seat against Larry Hogan, who was the governor in Maryland. He positioned himself as a moderate, hoping that he could get Democrats to vote for him. But Angela Alsobrooks looks like she's got a pretty big lead there, so that could be a hold for the Democrats. The next one, a big one, is Michigan. Alyssa Slotkin is the Democrat running against Republican Mike Rogers. The seat was held by Debbie Stabenow, who is retiring, so it's an open seat. It's all the polls show it to be very close. I think it's a point or two difference. So if we would really like to win Michigan and hold Michigan. So focus on that race, and if you have a few bucks, send it over to Alyssa Slotkin. In Missouri, this is an interesting one. Now, a lot of people would think, well, Missouri is so red, there's no chance a Democrat could win a Senate seat in Missouri since Claire McCaskill left the Senate, or actually she was defeated in her last race. But the incumbent senator in Missouri is Josh Hawley. Is there anybody up there? Well, it's hard to pick the most toxic Republican senator. Josh Hawley is right up there with the best of them. This is the guy who there's film of him running for his life during the insurrection when he was giving a fist to the Trumpers outside the Capitol. Now, he's running against a former military guy, Lucas Kuntz, who is really catching fire there. They just had a debate the other day, and Lucas Kuntz just... It was almost like the Kamala Harris-Donald Trump debate. That's how bad Josh Hawley looked in that race. And before I take a break and bring Chuck in, I just want to mention the Montana Senate race, where the incumbent John Tester has been running a very, very hard, tight race against Tim Sheehy, who is a Republican businessman and Navy veteran who... Maybe I should have researched this before, but I think he's one of these guys running for the Senate who doesn't live in the state that he's running in. This is what the Republican Party does. They run around and they look for these rich guys who are very kind of extreme right-wing Trump supporters, and they convince them to run for Senate races so they can knock Democrats out. So John Tester, very close race. We need to hold that seat. So if you have any extra money, send it over to John Tester. And I'm going to go back. I'll be coming back to the rest of these Senate races in a minute. but I want to bring in my very special surprise guest, Chuck Helstein, who I believe has some interesting things in mind for Election Day for the station. What's up, Chuck?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Stephen. Appreciate it. It's been a while since we've chatted, right?
Thanks for being here. This is your first appearance on the political show.
It is, right?
Yeah.
I tried to stay fairly politically in the shadows, or neutral, as it were. But when we bought the station, one of our goals was to be able to provide real information to real people. Yep. So this is one of the opportunities I think we can do that. So, Ryan, who's running the board on this show, has done a really good job in providing us some capabilities we didn't have before.
That's Ryan Thompson,
yep.
By the way.
So we're going to go live on Tuesday at 6 p.m., and we're going to provide you guys all results local, probably once or twice per hour as we cut back and forth between national feeds. So when I say local, we're going to go through all the propositions up in northern Arizona, all of the actual races that are really important to you guys. And we're going to call those out, and we're going to use legitimate websites like the county website. We're going to publish our sources on our website too, so you guys can see where we're getting this data from. Mm-hmm. And we're going to try to be super transparent about it.
So how is the structure of that actually going to work? So let's say you start at 6 or you come in at 6:30 with another update. How is the update?
Yeah, it's going to be actually fairly free-flowing, right? It's an election, so they may give us 3 updates an hour. I'll go live 3 times and let you guys know. There may be an hour where we don't get one update at all, right? And so we'll kind of go in with ebbs and flows. But the really cool thing is we're pretty agile here, as I tell you guys, mm-hmm. so we can tap in real quick and give you guys just quick hit pieces of information. It'll be very old school radio, right? I won't come on and give you the good DJ voice. I'll just give you guys the details.
So you're going to comment live as the night goes on.
Yeah, Ryan and I both will, right? Because we're going to have to be kicking it back and forth to each other because there's a lot of data out there.
Right.
But we're going to try to make it really simple. We're going to use the actual government websites. We're going to publish. The Avapi has a feed of actually the ballot room, so we're going to load that on our website too, so people can track that and just watch it kind of in the background as well. Our national coverage will come from CBS. Mm-hmm. Again, we couldn't really find a true nonpartisan media other than Reuters, and we can't afford it. It's like 20 G's a month. So we try to find something that is least offensive to everyone, and we'll try to shoot it right down the middle with you guys.
So
that's our goal.
So it's not like you're going to be watching MSNBC and Steve Kornacki at the board and just saying what he's saying.
No, sir. We're going to be literally on the Yavapai County website and say, okay prop 504, it's 390 to 200.
So is the focus going to be more just on Arizona, or are you going to talk about some national?
I mean, as we get to it, right? Yeah. If a race is called and I happen to be live,
right.
we'll chat about it real quick, right? And so I encourage any listeners out there too. We'll do some call-ins, maybe during or post. So anyone listening out there, get your fingers ready to dial, and we can have a discussion about it, right? Or call in and ask questions, right? Or if I make a mistake, I'm not perfect. That's the thing we want people to know. We're just going to give it our best shot to give you real information as cleanly and clearly as we can.
So when you have these spots that come up, how long are they going to be for?
It really depends. I suspect Ryan and I were kind of thinking maybe 1 to 2 minute update. Mm-hmm. More just quick hits, right? I can't dive deep into every proposition.
Sure.
Not everyone knows what they are anyway.
There's 13 of them.
Right? But you want to know if they passed or not.
Right.
So we can cut through the noise, give you those quick hits, and let you go on about the rest of your day.
Now, Arizona, a lot of people are saying that Arizona, for any number of reasons, could be called late, unless... Like in the case of Ruben Gallego, if he's winning big, that'll probably be called early. But the presidential may be very late in the evening. How are you going to handle?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you'll give me a second, I'll tell you a little story. Right,
you got more than a second.
Yeah. Last time Ryan and I went through this, we were in college, and I believe it was Bush Gore. And so they couldn't figure out what was happening in Florida. Yep. So Ryan and I and a few other folks carried a show for 4 hours into the middle of the night talking about nothing, right? And we were debating politics and, policies, things like this. We're ready for that. We can do that. We may kick you over to George Norrie, and I'll come back in and say, hey, it's 2 a.m. I don't have anything to tell you. But as long as it's kind of out there, we'll keep tapping in.
Cool. Can I tell you a quick story about the Bush-Gore race?
Please do.
So during election night, I was in Fort Myers, Florida, for a week-long baseball tournament.
Okay.
When I was playing when I was living in New York, I went to the tournaments in Fort Myers they had every year. It was called the Roy Hobbs World Series.
Okay.
And I had a bunch of my teammates over to my condo watching the election returns that night, and it went late, so they all went home because I think we had a day off the next day, actually, which was lucky. But I went to bed like a lot of people did, thinking that George Bush won the election. So I was pretty depressed. So I wake up very early the next morning. I trudge myself down to a local diner that was right near my condo by the water in Fort Myers. And the waitress says, "Man, you don't look good." And I said, "Really? How can you tell?" He said, "It's all over your face. You just look." Well, I'm like really upset that George Bush won the election. And she said, "No, he didn't."
To be determined, right?
And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "The election's not called yet."
That was the first time they turned election coverage into cliffhangers.
That's right.
It's a very good programming move, right?
So I had a much more pleasant breakfast that morning. Ultimately, it didn't turn out the way the Democrats wanted, but
and I'll just call that out here too, right? Like, I know I'm on a Democratic show here this morning,
right,
but we're not taking this from attack either way.
Sure.
Literally, I just feel it's important that people get the right information as to what is going on.
Right.
So other than saying I'm just a small town dude that's willing to tell you that, I can't do much more, right? But that's the goal.
So if you have call-ins, can I call and disguise my voice and come up with a different name, or do I?
I'd like to think Ryan and I are fairly smart, so we'll probably know it's you, but you can give it a shot, right?
That's great. Well, so any other observations you have about what we're going through in the country election-wise right now?
I have a lot of observations, right?
Yeah.
So
give us a couple. I'll give you some time.
Well, thank you, sir. Obviously, first time in an election cycle as a media owner. So that's been a very different experience. You can actually kind of see strategy at a much different level, right? Mm-hmm. So as you come in and chat with me about this periodically, I mentioned where I see Kamala doing ads in more internet, more streaming based than I see Trump does. Little things like that kind of show me who's got a more coherent strategy and kind of a path to green. Now, obviously, it's politics, right? Mm-hmm. These are human beings, so we can't exactly tell. But I definitely think there's some signs as to who's in a position of strength and who's trying to catch up right now.
Right. What do you get any feedback from listeners about, hey, you're not sort of like thinking that you may be partisan because a lot of the Democrats are placing ads and maybe Republicans. I know you get Eli Crane, the congressman, doing ads, but is most of your advertising coming from the Democrat side?
So I'm going to enlighten everyone here on the other end of the year, right? FCC actually mandates that political ads have to be run if you have inventory. So we have no ability as a media entity to pick and choose what ads we run. It literally is an order. We get it. We have to take it if we have the availability. Right. To be honest with you, I think the Republicans actually probably run slightly more ads than the Democrats as of right now. But it's fluctuated. It's been fairly 50-50 as we went. So,
is it coming from across the board in different races in Arizona, or is it mostly like Eli Crane, Trump, or the more major races?
The major races are the ones that people are really focusing on. So your president, your Senate, your House, the ones you were talking about at the top of the show, right?
Right.
Those are obviously your meat and potatoes.
Cool.
So we get a few other ones, ancillary. You get a few PACs that you're not familiar with. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, it's those big kind of heavy hitters.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to go back now and talk about some of these Senate races that I really think people need to focus on. So I've already gone through Arizona, Florida, Michigan, Missouri, and Montana. And as you can tell, this is alphabetical order. So there's a very interesting race in Nebraska. Now, normally, I probably wouldn't even be talking about Nebraska because Nebraska has always been pretty solidly red. But the interesting thing about this race in Nebraska this year is that there's an independent named Dan Osborne, a former military guy, who's running against the incumbent Republican Deb Fischer. And the race happens to be very, very close. A lot of people think that Dan Osborne has a chance to pull this out. And the reason that may be good for the Democrats, even though Dan Osborne is an independent, is that he is likely to caucus with Democrats if he's in the Senate. And that's a key thing because, as some of you may know, there are two independents in the Senate right now, Bernie Sanders and the senator from Maine, whose name is escaping me right now, but They are both independents that caucus with the Democrats. And, I should remember that Maine senator, but it's very early in the morning. Anyway, our next door neighbor, Nevada, has a race that's very important where the incumbent Democrat, Jackie Rosen, is running against the Republican Sam Brown. Sam Brown is a military veteran who the Republican Party hopes can take that Republican support and flip Nevada to a red Senate seat. But Sam Brown is another one of these guys who is another one of these wealthy guys who I don't believe lives in the state. I could be wrong about that, but Jackie Rosen needs to hold on to that seat. Another crucial race in Ohio where the incumbent Democrat, Sherrod Brown, is running against, dare I say it, another wealthy businessman named Bernie Moreno, who got his start in auto dealerships and then became further wealthy being involved in cryptocurrency. Need I say more? Sherrod Brown is, like I said, it's a very tight race right now. And you know what? I'm not going to say Kamala Harris has a good shot at flipping Ohio, but I think it's going to be a lot closer, especially since Ohio is one of those states where abortion is on the ballot. Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, the incumbent Democrat, is running against Dave McCormick, another businessman and Army veteran. Bob Casey looks like, according to the polls, in the lead there. I think Pennsylvania is looking increasingly good for Kamala Harris, especially according to the early vote counts and who is voting in Pennsylvania. The women vote in Pennsylvania is been off the charts in early voting. So I think Bob Casey's going to hold that seat. Very important race. This one is a big long shot. That may be redundant, big long shot. I don't know. But Marsha Blackburn, who's probably among the most toxic Trump women in the Senate or anywhere, is the incumbent senator, but her opponent is Gloria Johnson, a Democrat from the state legislature, who was the woman who supported the two young black state legislators that the Republicans tried to kick out of the legislature. If you remember that story earlier in the year, Gloria Johnson not only supported those black men and how they were being treated, but she stepped up and she decided to run against Marsha Blackburn. This is one of those races where I so hope that Gloria Johnson can come through, because we need people like Marsha Blackburn out of politics, especially out of the Senate. And last but not least is the Senate race in Wisconsin, where Democratic incumbent Tammy Baldwin is running against, you guessed it, another wealthy Republican businessman named Eric Hovde. He's being supported big by Mitch McConnell. And by the way, Mitch McConnell, the current Senate minority leader, has a PAC that's putting mass amounts of money into some of these races to try to get Republicans to win these seats. Because even if Mitch McConnell's saying that he's going to leave the Senate, or at least I think he said he's going to leave leadership, he still wants to get that Senate in Republican hands. God only knows what Trump supporting. It's hard to bring up adjectives because I might say something that's not permitted on the radio. But there's a few people that want Mitch McConnell's leadership position. All of them are terrible. I'll just leave it at that. So again, with these Senate races, please focus on them. And even if you don't live in those states, send them a couple of bucks. They need your help. We need to hold the Senate so Kamala Harris can get her agenda passed. Okay. So I was thinking about we may go to a break, but then I realized that I have a lot of stuff to talk about with the Arizona races. So I got my little cheat sheet here because you can't do this off the top of your head all the time. So here are the races both statewide in Arizona and locally in Yavapai and Coconino County, which affects Sedona, where this show is coming from, that you need to focus on. And if you haven't voted yet, you need to vote for these people. I talked about this last week, but even though early voting is over, Election Day is the big day on Tuesday. So let's go down the list. The state legislature, which the Republicans are holding the legislature and the Senate by one vote. And this is potentially flippable. And if you haven't voted yet for these positions, you need to vote for Mike Fogel as the state senator. He's running against the totally toxic Mark Fincham, major Trump supporter, insurrectionist supporter, vaccine denier, election denier. Go down the whole list. State representative, you can vote for two people. And the ones you should focus on are Jay Ruby and Marcia Smith for the state representative. And this is in Legislative District 1. Okay. Now, this is an extremely important race. The Arizona Corporation Commission. We have had the Democratic candidates for the Arizona Corporation Commission on 2 episodes of the Patriotic Progressive. And there are 3 tremendous candidates named Eulania Aguilar, Jonathan Hill, and Joshua Polachek. And the Arizona Corporation Commission is a very important body that handles regulations of agencies, energy agencies, all of these very important businesses that, like APS, that provide power here. The Republican candidates who are currently on that commission, they need to be flipped because they're in the pockets of the major corporations in this area that want to control what goes on in terms of those kind of decisions. So the Arizona Corporation Commission is vital. So it's Eulania Aguilar, Jonathan Hill, and Joshua Polachek. If you live in Yavapai County, the race for supervisor of District 3, the Democratic candidate who has done a fantastic job in the primary to win her primary and is doing a fantastic job in the general is Nikki Check, who has been on my show a couple of times. She's been on the Democratic Perspective show that Stephen Williamson hosts a couple of times. She's been a great candidate. She'll make a great supervisor. You need to support her against the Republican candidate. And in Coconino County, if you happen to be in that area, the supervisor for District 3 candidate is Adam Hess, the Democrat, and the county recorder, who was a sponsor of my last 2 political shows, is Aubrey Sonderegger, and she is going to be the one who handles elections in Coconino County. Very important positions. So there are 13 statewide propositions on the ballot this election. Huge number. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I may not even go through more than one. I'm going to see how much time I have. But the big kahuna, as they say, is Proposition 139, which would establish a state constitutional right to abortion. Ladies and gentlemen, you must vote yes for reproductive freedom for women on Proposition 139. There's no other choice. If you've been following the news and you've been hearing the stories about young women in Texas especially who are dying because they have not been getting health care when they've had emergencies during their pregnancies, you know what the situation is. This is untenable in this country. So in Arizona, Proposition 139 will establish a state constitutional right to abortion, and you must vote yes on this proposition. You know, there's I'm looking at the list here that are on the ballot. There are some propositions on here that obviously have been presented and supported by the Republican Party. Seeing, you know, the one Proposition 137, for instance, ends term limits for state supervisor and Supreme Court justices, which would remove citizen input. That doesn't sound like something that any reasonable person would want. Proposition 136 allows any person to sue to invalidate a citizen initiative before it's placed on the ballot. Crazy. Proposition 135, and I'm reading these backwards in numbers. Proposition 135 restricts the governor's ability to declare a state of emergency. Can you imagine that? You know, the potential to have like big fires in Arizona. What if there's a period where we don't get a lot of rain and there's a water shortage? No ability for the governor to declare a state of emergency. What does that come from? I don't get it. It's just, and Proposition 134 makes it much harder to get citizen initiatives on the ballot. So, you know, some of these are just crazy. I'm looking at the more local ones. In Sedona, Proposition 483 upholds a city zoning ordinance to allow the Safe Place to Park program. Now, this is a very contentious issue in Sedona. We've got very passionate people on both sides of this issue. So, you know, just vote your conscience on that and what your opinion may be. But these are very important propositions that you got to focus on. Don't just vote for the president and for the Senate and forget about and there's one I completely forgot to mention. And that's the big congressional race in Congressional District 2, where Democrat Jonathan Nez, a Native American who has been on this show a couple of times and was here last week, as a matter of fact, is running against incumbent Republican Eli Crane, who is a total Trump supporter, an election denier, cites toxic people like Paul Gosar as one of his mentors as a politician. You know, this is a guy who needs to go. And the issue is this. Eli Crane managed to win that election because that district was redistricted. So the Democratic Congressman Tom O'Halloran, who had that seat, was basically redistricted out. So Eli Crane won. It became more of a red district. So there is the potential for Eli Crane to be in that seat until the next redistricting, which isn't until the next census in 2030, before the 2030 election. So the only way we can get Eli Crane out of that seat is by supporting Jonathan Nez. And right now, the reports that I'm hearing that are starting to get out in the public is that Jonathan Nez is really close in that race. The last numbers were 42-42 in terms of percentage support, which means 16% was undecided. And I was really impressed by that number, because if 16% of the people like a week ago were undecided for an incumbent congressperson, there's a chance that Jonathan Nez could pull off a major upset. And by the way, if Jonathan Nez wins that race, that could be one of the biggest upsets in the entire country. And it will be very welcome indeed. So in the few minutes that I have left, I'm just going to sort of do a little stream of consciousness about how I'm feeling about all this. So, folks, I started this show back in the middle of July. Chuck Helstein gave me the opportunity to have an hour weekly show, a second show that leaned toward Democratic positions, for lack of a better word. I was very thankful for that. And I just thought it was something that I needed to do in this election cycle because of how passionate I am about how important it is to save this democracy in this country we love. And Donald Trump is a direct threat in so many ways. If you know anything about Project 2025, you know what the agenda is. 900 pages of just eviscerating the current state of this country on every level. And while Donald Trump may get up in interviews and say at rallies that he doesn't know anything about Project 2025, believe me, the closest people in his campaign, his advisors, people like Stephen Miller, who might be the most toxic individual second to Donald Trump in the country. And by the way, that doesn't get enough coverage in the media of how much influence somebody like Stephen Miller has with Donald Trump. I'm sure he writes all of his horrendous speeches. This is a guy who got up at that rally at Madison Square Garden and said, America is only for Americans. After Donald Trump became president, he was on a national news show, interviewed saying, the president of the United States authority is all-powerful and will not be questioned. He said that in 2017, ladies and gentlemen. So if somebody like Stephen Miller, who is that close to Donald Trump, who likely writes all of his most toxic speeches, including the ones attacking immigrants and demonizing immigrants, which is Stephen Miller's big issue, if that's the man who is the closest to Donald Trump, you're telling me that Donald Trump is not on board with Project 2025? Probably the most insane platform ever written by a political party in this country. It can't happen. It just can't happen. So, while I'm saying all this and I'm not doing it to scare people, I'm certainly not saying it to scare people into voting. I think we all know what our responsibility is at this moment in time. And sometimes, by the way, I even scare myself. My wife tells me all the time, my wife, the woman warrior, tells me all the time, stop looking at social media. It's driving you crazy. But you know what? It has been driving me crazy. But like I said at the very beginning of the show, to bring it back to the beginning, I'm very, very confident that good and right and truth and facts will win out on Tuesday or maybe Wednesday morning. There's just no other alternative. And, you might be listening to me say that and say, well, hey, Stephen, what are you going to do if somehow Donald Trump wins the election? Well, my half joke to anybody who's asked me that question has been, hey, my passport's like on the top of my desk in my office and it's ready to roll. And then, of course, Republicans would hear that and say, good, let's get out of here. If you don't like it, we don't need you. But it's half joking, but it's serious. I don't know how we recover if Donald Trump is in office for another 4 years. And while you might think, well, maybe we can survive another 4 years and a Democrat could take over in 2028, that's not their plan. Their plan is to win the election and then basically try to end elections, which the Supreme Court helped when they told Donald Trump that he had total immunity as president. So, there's no guarantee that if Donald Trump wins this election, we'll just have a normal election cycle in 2028 when Donald Trump can't be on the ballot. Some other Trumper will run. But we have to win this one. And we have to win the Senate, and we have to win the House. And you've got to vote for Democrats up and down the ballot. There is no alternative. And by the way, if you've been really following what's been going on during this campaign, with every moment, Donald Trump and his surrogates are setting the stage for contesting the election on Tuesday. They are trying to position this as he's got such a big lead, there is no possible way he could lose. So when he loses by, 100 electoral votes on Tuesday, he can go back to everything was rigged. Folks, this has got to end. The period of Donald Trump in our lives has to end. It's been almost 10 years, and it's got to be over. So I'm pretty much begging you, pleading with you, imploring you, please, if you haven't voted, go out and vote on Tuesday. Vote for Democrats. Let's end this toxic Donald Trump period. I'm kind of out of breath. And it's a good thing, because that's it for today's Patriotic Progressive for Truth, Justice, and the Democratic Way. I've been your host, Stephen Hanks, and I want to thank my special guest, KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio owner and program director Chuck Helstein. Many thanks to my producer in the booth, Ryan Thompson. And remember, you can live stream our show on mellowmountainradio.com and hear the podcast version on Apple and Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, my personal YouTube channel, and now on my Substack newsletter at Patriotic Progressive. Also, remember to tune in to KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio's election night coverage, starting at 6 p.m. and continuing as long as the election is running. And I will be maybe calling in during the evening with some analysis on where the races stand before they get called, which no doubt will be when most folks, at least in this part of Arizona, are fast asleep. And as President Biden would say, that's no joke. Tune in again next Saturday morning when I'll be presenting my Kamala Harris Victory Celebration Show. But for now, thanks for listening to the Patriotic Progressive for Truth, Justice, and the Democratic Way. Have a great week, everyone, and make sure you vote.